Good morning. Welcome to our Saturday workshop. The first one in this year. Sorry, there was one last week. But this one, I want to use this one to really position the conversations that we're going to be having for the rest of this year. Again, my name is Charles Sine. I'm CEO of Anti-Fragility Health. Welcome, join us. What is really at the core of Anti-Fragility Health? Anti-Fragility Health, at its core, its mission is to give people freedom. And because we know one of the attributes of freedom is health. Because once you have good health and an assurance of good health, and you have been trained and given all the habits or developed the habits to have a long and healthy life, then you can bring all the other possibilities or things that your legacy and all the things you want to build, you can bring them to fruition. That is really at the heart. And we have chosen a pathway that's focused around prevention, reversal, and optimization of your health. Being at the core, we know today that almost 80 to 90% of people die from chronic illness. That's our focus. And where does chronic illness come from? 90% of chronic illness comes from lifestyle. And we know that if we can transform lifestyles, we can change the paradigm of why people die so early from chronic illnesses. And at the core of that is lifestyle. And the core of getting the kind of lifestyle that's focused requires transformation. Therefore, our topic today, transformation and enrollment. At the core of this journey are those two fundamental attributes, or what we'll call ways of being. You have to be transformed, and in the transforming process, you enroll. In Buddhism, we talk about the three-path journey. That journey is from dependence to independence to interdependence. It's the same thing with health. You remove yourself from a place of not having knowledge or having developed the habits and lifestyle that is healthy to a place where you, as an individual, we call that place a place of independence, now understand the habits that would give you a long and healthy lifestyle. But to move to that next level where transformation lives requires enrolling others into the gifts that you have achieved in becoming free and independent. And therefore, the ability to move from independence to interdependence requires enrollment of other people into that lifestyle. So let's start today with the conversation about freedom. Health as an attribute of freedom. Why do we were born free, but we constrain ourselves in the process. Why is freedom important? First of all, it allows us to walk away from fear, because fear, if you're afraid, you're not free. Freedom is only for people who are not afraid. Fear and freedom do not live in the same space. And when you're free, everything is possible. Because the things that give you access to what you want is the action that you take. And therefore, anything and everything that you want is available. And that is the space of possibility. Possibility lives only when you're free. And therefore, freedom, I call this the freedom box. There are 5 things that drive freedom. Health is number 1, knowledge is number 2, relationships number 3, time number 4, money is number 5. We focus on health. You can find that support in other places. Health is what we call well-being. Another name for that, for you being, and there are 4 attributes to that: nutritional, physical, emotional, and environmental. But it's very important that this journey begins from dependence. Most people are dependent. They're dependent on their doctors. They are dependent on the restaurants where they've outsourced their meals. They're dependent on all the things that they buy to be healthy. They are dependent on the supplements they take to be right, to be manufactured properly. And so the movement from dependence to independence, it's a very, very big transforming step. And it requires that you take ownership and an understanding specifically with regard to health of those four things. So let's talk about those four things. And, throughout the year, we're going to be walking through them in a lot more detail. Most people don't understand what nutrition is. When they talk about food, they think about food in the concept of calories. No, we're talking about nutrients. That's different from calories. Most foods will come with nutrients and calories. The body specifically requires more nutrients than calories. It requires both. And that's why food is broken, or nutrition is broken into two different things. Into what we call macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are the big macromolecules like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, fiber, and water. There are 5 of them, macronutrients. And there are rules around each of them that are really comprehensive and necessary. Under micronutrients, we have 2 specific groups. We have vitamins and minerals. Really, really critical for our health. The underlying biochemistry uses calories as the energy source to power everything else. So the fuel for powering is important. Even more so, important are the nutrients that drive the overall biochemical pathways, as they're called, which is what drives my body. The biochemical pathways are powered by the calories. And in the biochemical pathways, the nutrients are what are used for the building blocks for repair, for regeneration, and for excretion, right? Very, very important processes that keep us alive. That's nutrition. Let's talk about physical well-being. Physical well-being has to do with strength, with stamina, with flexibility, and with balance. Very, very important issues for you to stay healthy and for you to live a long life, especially balance. Most older people die from falling. Very, very important issue. So keeping your balance and having strength to do the things that are necessary for you to be healthy are really important. Again, strength, stamina, flexibility, and balance. Let's look at emotional well-being. Very, very important that our emotional well-being is really powerful. And at the core of emotional well-being is something that is really amazing. And it is that issue of forgiveness. The ability to free ourselves from the baggage and constraints of our life centers around, first of all, understanding freedom and the opportunity of possibility and walking away from fear. But secondly, forgiving and forgiving all of those who have trespassed against you, as it says in the Lord's Prayer. It's a very important issue. It frees your mind now to dwell on possibility. When you're constrained by unforgiven factors, as we call them, it is impossible for you to dwell in possibility and therefore ride possibility all the way into the sunset. So it's a very important issue, emotional well-being. Most people have big challenges with their emotional well-being and the ability to center themselves and stay in a place of forgiveness and humility. The gifts we have been given are gifts, so we cannot be arrogant about it. They are gifts that we're supposed to share with others, so we can have communion and we can all come to that place of finding freedom and peace. It's very important that we and the gifts we've been given find humility and forgiveness so we can have the emotional well-being to find community and to share. And finally, environmental well-being. Increasingly, we live in a very, very toxic environment. Therefore, it is important for us to look for means of having clean air, clean water, clean food, and clean things that we buy to ensure that we don't live in a very toxic body. Toxicity is one of the most challenging issues within the body. And that toxicity leads to a lot of chronic illness, even if you have a lot of good healthy habits. Again, let me just go back to the emotional well-being. As we know, stress is one of the biggest causes of chronic illness. And most of the stress comes from perceptions of ourselves, a lack of authenticity and integrity, and a lack of purpose and focus as to where we're going. So very, very important issues. So again, the only way you can move from dependence to independence is to build freedom. And at the core of it is health. Without health, there is no freedom. All these attributes are very important. Without knowledge, there is no freedom. Without relationships, there is no freedom. Without an appropriate and adequate use of time, there is no freedom. And if you're broke, there's no freedom. These 5 things are really critical. When one of them is absent, the whole box collapses. So it is important in moving from dependence to independence that you take control of those 5 attributes and begin to define the essence of your freedom. Because when you're always broke, you cannot have emotional well-being. You're always dependent on somebody else to help you. If you don't have enough nutrition, you're not free because your body needs the nutrients. If you have some physical incapacities or you're incapacitated physically, you're not free. You have to depend on a wheelchair or other people. And if you have a lot of toxicity, it actually affects your brain with neuroinflammation. And therefore you get depression, dementia, and Alzheimer's and all the other things that arise from neuroinflammation. So at the core here is this conversation of how we journey from dependence to independence. It's the essence. It is at the core of that journey. And that's the beginning. So, but let's look at what happens as we journey. We call it the journey to transformation. We call it maturity is at the core of the pathway to transforming a lifestyle. What do I mean by maturity? It's the different steps that you have to take up the ladder to move from dependence to independence. It takes a journey, and that journey requires capabilities that are accrued in terms of maturity. So let's look at, I have defined 4 levels of maturity. 2 of them are foundational, and they are around what we call the rules and the game. For example, if we take nutrition, what is the rules around nutrition? There are so many when we look at nutritional biochemistry. There are things like intermittent fasting. There are things like time-restricted feeding. There are things like proportions of calories or proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. There are issues around toxicity. So there's rules and there's the game. So what is the game? The game is what is available. What are the nutritional calories and nutrients that are available? And the rules are what proportions of them make a good and stable, great diet. Very important issues. And then mastery takes us into a deep understanding and integration of the game and the rules and the customization into our own lives. Not everybody likes carbohydrates, but you have to eat some carbohydrate. And so that mastery, for example, I love rice. I had to look for a way to make rice a resistant starch so I can have rice and not be compromised by the amount of sugar that rice introduces into my diet. And there are ways in which you then can convert starches into resistant starches. And that comes with mastery. Mastery one, which is really that integration of the personalization of the rules and the game. You make that yours. And then mastery level two is an optimization, which the Japanese will call continuous improvement and daily control. We now move into the areas of optimization where on a daily basis, I am looking at little experiments to optimize how much rice, how much resistance is the rice building, how much protein, how much, right? You're optimizing. For example, we have COVID-19 right now. On a daily basis, I'm looking at the nutrients, how much zinc, how much selenium, how much vitamin C, how much vitamin B complex, how much melatonin for sleep, how much SPM for inflammation, so I'm looking at all those nutrients and I'm optimizing because I already understand foundation one and foundation two, and I've already integrated into my life, and so now I'm optimizing on a daily basis. So this maturity allows us to then begin to plan and structure the journey appropriately. So when people come to the clinic, the first step is that we start focusing on these things and we measure them and we give them some guidance. But most people fail because they don't move to this next step and say, for example, you make a resolution this new year that you're going to be exercising 2 or 3 times a week. You have to plan it. How is that going to happen? And you have to make the time. And then you have to keep commitments to yourself. That's why the journey requires authenticity and integrity. You need to have integrity. So when you make a resolution comes with integrity. And what is integrity? It means keeping your word to yourself. And it also means if you don't keep your word to yourself, how are you going to make it up? So that you're always in integrity with your word. And what are your word? The resolutions that you made for 2021. So really very important that we understand that maturity, this journey, maturity as the pathway, gives you the roadmap to say, how do I get from dependence to independence? And what am I going to learn? And after I finish or achieve some level of independence, I now want to start travel to interdependence. But we're going to come to that. That maturity applies to that full journey. It's a 3-step journey. Where you're starting dependence, you need to know you're dependent, because most people who are slaves don't actually know they're slaves. So you need to come to an understanding that I am a slave because all these 5 things I do not have. Therefore, I'm not free. If you are not free, you're a slave. Doesn't matter whether they call you a slave or not. If you don't have freedom of exploring all your possibilities, then you are a slave. If you're not healthy, if you don't have all the knowledge, if you depend on your doctor to tell you what to do, you're a slave to the doctor. If you don't have good, positive, strong relationships, if you don't know how to use your time, and if you're broke, you are a slave. And therefore, you need to move from what we call dependence, which is what slaves are. They're dependent on other people to take care of them, to a place of independence. You need a maturity roadmap for that. And the maturity roadmap would help you get to that first step, which we call independence. Then it will get you to step number 3 on our diagram today. Transformation is only sustainable if it is part of community. You cannot stand as an island on your own. We're social human beings, and therefore So your transformation is only sustainable when it is integral in the community. And that's why we call that the journey now from independence to interdependence. And I'll show you a short journey. And this takes us this is the journey from dependence to independence and then to interdependence. And if you look at Stephen Covey, the 7 and 8 habits talk about that journey. How do I move from dependence, from being a slave, to being free, contributing member of a community? It's a very important, and it requires at its core the issue of freedom. And one of the core attributes of freedom is your health. So I'm going to finish by talking about enrollment as the source of building community. What is enrollment? It's about inspiring others to be free. They need to get the message of freedom. And when they get the message of freedom, then now they can create their own possibilities and live in that possibility. Then all of us begin to enjoy a long and healthy life. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful 2021.